There's something haunting about the way betrayal sounds when it comes from your own child. My daughter didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply told me she needed my money now because waiting for me to die was taking too long. Days later, a box arrived on my porch. It smelled like death before I even opened it. What was inside changed everything I believed about motherhood love and the fine line between patience and poison. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. My name is Eleanor. I'm 68 years old and I live in a quiet town just outside Duluth, Minnesota. I never imagined my life would unravel like it did, not from illness or loneliness, but from the mouth of my only daughter. It happened on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks before Mother's Day. The coffee hadn't even finished brewing when Melanie came by wearing that impatient look she gets when she wants something. She didn't even sit down. Her voice was sharp-clipped. She looked at me like I was a burden, not her mother. She said she didn't have time for games and needed me to sign over the remaining share of the property now. When I hesitated, her tone turned cold. Then she said it. "You're just a useless old woman now. I need the money before you die." I didn't cry. Not right then. I felt like someone had dropped ice into my lungs. It wasn't the words alone. It was the way she said them, like they were just facts. Like my death was just paperwork waiting to be processed. I had given her my body, my years, my savings, my trust. And in return, she saw me as a transaction. She left without waiting for a response. The door closed behind her like a slap. I stood in the kitchen for what felt like hours staring at the sink. My hands were shaking, but I hadn't realized it until Charles walked in and asked what was wrong. I couldn't find the words. I just sat down, quiet, my heart thudding in a way that didn't feel healthy. 2 weeks later, on Mother's Day, a box arrived on the porch. It was plain brown cardboard, sealed tight with clear tape. There was no note, no label. Just my name handwritten in thick black ink. It wasn't heavy, but something inside shifted when I picked it up. Not like an object. Like something soft. Or breathing. Charles came up behind me and took it gently from my hands. He turned it over, then froze. He looked at me with a strange, low kind of fear and said, "Don't open it. Can't you see the holes?" I looked closer. Along the sides, almost hidden against the folds, were tiny punctures. Perfect little circles. Like someone had made air vents. My stomach dropped. The box was warm. We didn't open it. We put it on the back porch and called the police, but even after they came and took it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew who sent it. Not because I had proof, but because my heart recognized the same cold intent as that voice 2 weeks ago. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. Or worse, an invitation. Something had shifted in my daughter, something I hadn't wanted to see. And now it was too late to pretend she hadn't meant every word. I was 26 when I held Melanie for the first time. Her tiny fingers curled around mine like she already knew I belonged to her. From that moment on, every choice I made came second to what she might need. I was still grieving when my husband died in a car accident 6 months later. The house felt too quiet without him, and I didn't have the luxury to mourn. Melanie was just learning to crawl. I had to keep going. I picked up double shifts at the hospital, sometimes triple on weekends. Nursing was hard on the body, but I told myself it was temporary. Just until things got easier. I learned to sleep in 2-hour stretches and budget every penny. I remember skipping dinner so she could have new ballet shoes. She never knew. That was the point. I wanted her world to feel steady, even when mine was falling apart. When Melanie was 10, she asked me why her friends got picked up in nicer cars. I didn't tell her mine had broken down twice that week. I just nodded and found a used Toyota with decent mileage. It took me 11 months to pay it off. On her first day of middle school, she got out of the passenger seat smiling like she belonged. I went to work with blisters on my heels and didn't care one bit. I put her through private school even when it meant giving up vacations and working holidays. When she got accepted to college out of state, I cried into her laundry the night she left. It was pride mostly, maybe some fear, but never resentment. I wanted her to reach farther than I ever could. At 30, Melanie said she wanted to open her own nail salon. She had a good eye for color, a calm touch. But the bank wouldn't approve the full loan? I didn't even hesitate. I cashed out part of my retirement savings and handed her the check with both hands. She kissed me on the cheek and called me her angel. That night, I went home and made a grilled cheese sandwich for dinner. I didn't tell her that was all I could afford for the week. 2 years later, I met Charles. He was kind and gentle in ways I hadn't known I needed. We married after a year simple and quiet, just the way I liked it. But even then, Melanie came first. I cleared her debts 3 times. I helped with her taxes. When she said she needed help with rent, I wrote the checks without question. Charles never complained. He saw how much I loved her. There were little things I ignored. The way she stopped calling unless she needed something. The way her thank yous got shorter, less sincere. She missed my birthday twice in a row and said she was just too busy. I told myself she was stressed, not ungrateful. She was building a life. That's what I'd always wanted for her. Looking back, I see now that I gave without limits because I didn't know where the line should be. I loved her so fiercely that I forgot to ask if she loved me back the same way. Maybe she did once. Or maybe I was always just a safety net she assumed would never tear. Either way, I kept giving, and she kept taking. I don't regret loving my daughter. I never will. But somewhere along the way, my love turned invisible. And what was once devotion slowly became expectation. She didn't see me anymore. Just what I could give her. And when I had nothing left, she saw me as nothing. It started with little things. Melanie would call and ask if I could co-sign something for her and Nick. Just temporary, she'd say. Just a formality. They were trying to refinance or secure a lease or apply for a line of credit for the salon. Her voice always sounded rushed, like she was doing me a favor just by explaining it at all. I wanted to help. I trusted her. So I signed. Then came the favors that didn't feel like favors. She'd stop by and say she forgot her wallet or that her account was frozen again. Could I cover this one bill just for now? It would always be the last time. She'd promise. Nick rarely said much. He stayed quiet, watching me, always polite but cold. Like a man checking off a task instead of visiting family. One afternoon, she handed me a packet of papers and asked me to sign the last page. She said it was something routine for insurance, something the lawyer needed. I didn't have my glasses. She told me not to worry, it was just a formality. I signed, barely thinking, more out of habit than trust. Later that week, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. So I dug through my file cabinet and pulled the county records. That's when I saw it. A portion of the land, my land, had been transferred to her name. And Nick's. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen, trying to breathe. My fingers shook as I scrolled through the document. There was my signature at the bottom, neat and clean. But I had never agreed to this. I had signed something else. Or at least, that's what I believed. I didn't say anything right away. I wanted to think maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it could be undone. I convinced myself that Melanie must have misunderstood, that she would explain it if I asked. I didn't ask. A few days later, I overheard them in the living room. Charles and I were hosting a small dinner, just the 5 of us. I had gone into the kitchen for more wine. On my way back, I heard Nick's voice. He didn't whisper. He didn't care. We could have sold this house already if she wasn't still alive. I stopped in the hallway. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I told myself maybe I misheard, maybe he meant something else. Maybe it was a joke. But there was no laughter. Only silence after the words. I didn't walk in. I turned around and stayed in the kitchen until I could make my face look like nothing was wrong. When I brought out the wine, Melanie smiled and thanked me. Nick didn't look at me. Later that night, Charles asked if I was all right. I told him I was just tired. But something in me had started to shift. I stopped offering help before they could ask. I kept copies of everything. I said no softly at first, then more firmly. Melanie noticed. She became colder, less patient. Her texts came less often. The warmth faded like it had never been there at all. I wanted to believe it was stress. I wanted to believe she was overwhelmed and that Nick was the one pushing things. I needed to believe my daughter still cared. But I had already started learning the hardest truth. That love, once taken for granted, turns into something else. Something harder. Something lonelier. And I was beginning to understand that what I called sacrifice, she had learned to call entitlement. It was a little after 10 when the package arrived. I found it on the front step, tucked neatly against the door like any other delivery. There was no stamp, no barcode. Just my name, Eleanor, written in large, uneven letters that looked rushed. I stared at it longer than I should have, the silence around me getting heavier by the second. It was Mother's Day. I should have been touched. I should have smiled. Instead, my chest tightened. Charles came to the door behind me. He saw the box in my hands and frowned. He took it from me gently, turned it over, then paused. That's when he noticed the holes. Tiny, perfectly round air holes punched along the sides. His voice dropped low. Don't open it. Can't you see the holes? I didn't respond. I just took the box back as if drawn to it. My fingers ran along the cardboard. It felt slightly warm. The tape across the top was thick and sealed tight. Still, I peeled it back. The smell hit me before I saw it. Rot. Something sour and wet and sharp enough to make my eyes water. I gagged and stumbled back, my hand over my mouth. Charles stepped in, pulling the lid the rest of the way open, and we both froze. Inside, nestled in crumpled newspaper, was a rat. Dead. Bloated. Its fur matted, one eye barely intact. The stench curled out and filled the foyer. But it wasn't just the rat. Tucked beside it like a cruel little gift was a folded piece of paper. Charles didn't want me to read it, but I already had it in my hands. The handwriting was familiar. Slanted. Bold. 5 words written in ink that bled a little on the edges. If you're not dead yet, maybe this will help. I didn't scream. I didn't even speak. My whole body went cold, like my skin had separated from my bones. My heart thudded once hard, and then everything inside me dropped into silence. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel my feet. I could only feel the weight of something I didn't want to believe. Charles called the police. I didn't stop him. They came quickly, 2 officers who asked questions and bagged the box. I gave them answers, calm ones, careful ones. I told them I had no idea who might have sent it, that it must have been a mistake. I lied to their faces, and I felt myself doing it like I was outside my own body. Because I did know. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. Melanie. She wanted me afraid. Not just unsettled. Not just hurt. She wanted to terrify me. To make me feel hunted. To make my body respond with panic and sickness and dread. Maybe she hoped it would trigger something, a heart attack, a collapse. Maybe she thought fear would do what time hadn't yet done. I sat on the couch that night with a blanket over my shoulders, but I couldn't get warm. The air in the house smelled faintly of bleach. Charles had scrubbed the entryway twice. Still, I kept imagining the box sitting there waiting for me to open it again. I kept hearing the soft shuffle of the paper as I unfolded that note. I had given Melanie everything. And now I knew what I meant to her. An obstacle. That was all I was. A living delay. A signature away from her next payday. She didn't want to wait anymore. And this grotesque little box was her way of saying so. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the walls had closed in. Not because I was scared of what she might do next, but because the person I loved most in this world had sent me death in a box. And she did it on Mother's Day. The morning after the box arrived, I made tea instead of coffee. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the kettle whistle, and felt something inside me settle. Not peace. Not forgiveness. Something quieter. Sharper. A kind of stillness that felt more like steel than silence. Charles sat across from me, watching carefully. He didn't speak at first, just reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was steady. He asked if I was ready to call someone. I told him I already had. By noon, I had my old attorney on the phone. Not the firm Melanie had recommended years ago. Someone she didn't know. I asked about asset protection trusts and probate avoidance. I didn't cry. I didn't explain why. He didn't ask. Within days, we began moving everything. The house. The savings. My remaining investments. It took time, but I was patient. I moved the assets into a private trust with clear directives that excluded Melanie entirely. If anything happened to me, not a single dollar would pass through her hands. Charles offered to help, but he never pushed. He read the documents when I asked him to, drove me to appointments, brought me coffee while I signed the papers. But he never once asked if I was sure. He trusted me to know what I was doing. And I did. Each time I signed a form, I felt less afraid. Each time I notarized a document, I took back a little piece of myself. The more I transferred, the more invisible she became in my future. She had chosen what I meant to her. Now I was choosing what she would mean to me. I rewrote my will from scratch. I appointed Charles and my attorney as co-executors. I left my personal belongings to a small list of people who had shown me kindness when they didn't have to. Not family. Friends. Neighbors. A nurse I used to mentor who still sent me holiday cards. For Melanie, there was nothing. Not a line. Not a sentence. Not a cent. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I felt done. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone in my hand. I stared at her name in my contacts. It looked so familiar, so ordinary. I typed one message. I hope you get everything you deserve. I hit send. Then I turned off the phone. Charles didn't ask what I wrote. He just pulled back the blankets and said the bed was warm. I slipped in beside him and let the quiet stretch between us. There were no sirens, no storm, just the kind of stillness that comes after a fire has burned through everything in its path. I had nothing left to give her. Not my money, not my guilt, not even my grief. And in that silence, I found something better than justice. I found freedom. It didn't happen all at once. Greed rarely collapses in a single blow. It rots from the inside out quietly until one small shift brings the whole thing down. For Melanie, it started with the salon. Clients stopped coming. Rent increased. Her best technician left for a bigger shop across town, and the reviews began to dip. She tried to run promotions, but they only attracted customers who didn't come back. Soon she was behind on payments. First, the lease. Then the supplier accounts. Then the bank loan she had refinanced under her and Nick's names. Nick grew restless. He liked to pretend he was above it all, but he hated being poor. He stopped showing up at the salon. started spending more time at the bar down the street. Melanie would call me, or at least try to, but I had blocked her number after that last message. There was nothing left to say. A few months later, I heard from my lawyer that Melanie had filed a claim. She was demanding a share of my estate, claiming undue influence, that I had been coerced into signing away my assets, that Charles had manipulated me, that the trust was invalid. But my lawyer was ready. We had every document, every signature, every timestamp. He laid it out with the kind of clarity that doesn't leave room for questions. And then he showed the court something else. The police report, the photographs, the box. He read the note aloud. "If you're not dead yet, maybe this will help." The courtroom went quiet. Even the judge seemed to shift in her seat. Melanie's attorney asked to take a break. They didn't come back with a stronger argument. They came back with a settlement offer. We declined. The judge ruled that I had acted fully within my rights, that the trust was legally sound, that the estate was no longer in my name and therefore not subject to claim. And then, almost as an afterthought, the court moved to the matter of Melanie's behavior. Elder abuse is a term that feels clinical until it's being read aloud with your child's name attached to it. The judge cited intent to intimidate mental harm and evidence of manipulation. The police hadn't pressed charges, but the report stood as public record. And it weighed heavily in the next hearing. Nick had filed for divorce. He claimed emotional instability, unsafe behavior, and he had witnesses. Former employees from the salon, neighbors, even a babysitter who testified that Melanie left the children alone for hours while she fought with creditors over the phone. When the judge reviewed the custody arrangement, the report about the box resurfaced again. It was no longer just about money. It was about safety, about character. Melanie lost custody. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't want to see her cry. I didn't want to feel anything at all. But I got the call afterward. Her lawyer sounded tired, like he was apologizing with every word he said. No children. No business. No money. Nick had moved out the day after the ruling. He didn't even leave a note. Just took what he wanted and left the rest. Melanie called Charles once months later. He didn't answer. She left a message that said she hoped I was happy now, that I had taken everything from her. But the truth was, I hadn't taken a thing. She had set fire to her own house and then cursed the wind for blowing. She had believed I was her safety net, that no matter what she did, I would catch her. She had mistaken my love for weakness, my silence for surrender, my forgiveness for approval. But I had stopped being her shelter the moment she stopped seeing me as her mother. In the end, she was left with only her name, a last name that used to carry weight in our town. Now it sat in court documents and eviction notices, and the whispers of neighbors who no longer said hello. I didn't celebrate, but I did breathe a little easier, not because she was hurting, but because I wasn't anymore. We found the cabin in late spring, tucked in a quiet patch of Vermont hills. It was nothing fancy. Just a single-story home with white shutters and a porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs. It smelled like cedar and old stories, the kind of place you breathe deeper just walking through the door. I didn't hesitate. I knew the moment I stepped inside that this was where I would begin again. The mornings became my favorite part. I started planting flowers along the edge of the porch. Daffodils, lavender, wild roses I picked up from the local farm stand. I would pour myself a cup of tea and sit outside with my journal watching the fog lift off the trees. Sometimes I'd write. Sometimes I'd just listen. Birds whined, nothing else. The quiet used to scare me. Now it feels like a gift. Charles settled in just as easily. He takes his coffee the same way every day. 2 sugars, no cream. He reads the paper out loud when the stories make him laugh and hums, while he fixes things that don't need fixing. We've grown into this slow rhythm without trying. We don't talk about the past much. Not because we're avoiding it, just because we're no longer living inside it. Melanie hasn't reached out again. I don't expect her to. I've stopped waiting for closure that was never mine to create. Some relationships don't heal. Some truths don't get softer with time. And that's all right. The peace didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly. In the quiet way, the air feels softer when you're not bracing for a call. In the way meals taste better when no one's counting what they've done for you. In the deep breath I can take now without guilt pressing down on my lungs. I revised my will again last month. This time there was no anger behind it. No message to send. Just clarity. I left everything to a nonprofit that supports elderly women who've endured emotional abuse at the hands of their families. They help women move out, start over, find their voice again. I wish I had known about them sooner, but now someone else will. I walk most afternoons, just down the dirt road and back. I carry a little thermos of tea and sometimes talk to the wildflowers like they're old friends. Charles joins me when he's not fixing a fence or working in the shed. He always brings the dog. We never named her anything fancy. Just Ruby. She likes to stay close. I think she understands. The best part of this life isn't the quiet. It's the absence of fear. I don't flinch when the phone rings. I don't pace when the mail arrives. I sleep through the night and I wake up without dread in my chest. That's what freedom feels like. Not revenge. Not victory. Just the ability to be still and know you are safe. People think surviving is the end of the story. But it isn't. Peace isn't what happens after the storm. It's what you fight for once the clouds have cleared. And I fought hard for mine. Now I'm finally living it. To the mothers who feel like they've been forgotten. To the women who gave and gave until there was nothing left, only to be told they were never enough. I see you. I know your silence. I know the sting of being needed, then dismissed. I know what it's like to love someone so deeply that you lose the shape of your own voice. You are not weak. You are not disposable. You are not past your prime or beyond being loved with gentleness. Being older does not make you invisible. It makes you rich with stories, with lessons, with strength no one sees unless they've walked where you have. What you carry is not shame. It is survival. Kindness is not the same as surrender. Forgiveness does not mean staying quiet when you are mistreated. Love does not mean letting yourself be broken in someone else's storm. You can draw a line. You can say no. And you can still be a good mother, a good person, a good soul. If someone has made you feel like your worth ended when they no longer needed you, please believe this. They were wrong. The truth is, your worth was never theirs to measure. You are not what you provide. You are not what you give away. You are whole. Even now, I spent too many years thinking peace was something I had to earn through sacrifice. I understand now. Peace is not the reward for giving. It is the right to rest when you finally stop proving. So if today you feel tired, used up, or lost beneath someone else's expectations, I want you to remember this. You matter. Not because of what you do for others. Not because of how well you hold your pain. But because you exist. That is enough. And if you're waiting for permission to choose yourself, let this be it. Take it. Run with it. Build the life that brings you softness, not suffering. You deserve to live without fear, without begging for love, without apologizing for your boundaries. We get to start over. No matter our age. No matter how many pieces we have to gather up. This world still has room for our joy. Still has use for our wisdom. Still waits to see us bloom again. So keep going. Keep hoping. And never forget, You are not alone. Not now. Not ever.